and Canadian tradition is, George Bowering says that Canada jumped over the 19th century, that modernism becomes almost immediately postmodernism.
Oh, George. He is wonderful. But that is not entirely untrue, though. He's trying to irritate an awful lot of people, and I don't think we have time today to continue the irritation. I would enjoy. George is, well, what he's after there is that so many Canadian writers have said that modernism is a late development in Canada. We have to speak differently when we speak of Quebec. There's a different thing going on in terms of modernism in Quebec. But in English Canada, yes, it's late, and then it moves so rapidly, say from people like Louis Dudek and Irving Layton and Raymond Souster, to mention only those, and one mustn't forget Dorothy Livesey, and there are many more. One shouldn't, it's too bad to drop names in the rush. But it does move rapidly and looks back on itself as modernism, and writers from that context must do. They have to go back, because there's nothing to be done now except to correct modernism. And one of the fascinations in what George is saying about postmodernism, and certainly he moves into the postmodern in fascinating ways, is that that's precisely what they're doing. Not only do you have the anti-art element, art playing with itself element, art turning round on itself, and so on, but you've got the whole notion of where do we write from, given changed circumstances that put into question the Canadian traditions as much in a different way, but in as much as modernism put the American tradition into question.
Yeah, indeed. Is it imperialism to say that modernism is an American invention?
No, that would be from a certain number of Canadian writers to speak a Platonic and absolute truth. However, modernism actually comes from Europe.
Yes.
It is a disturbance within the entire European tradition. It is true that it was welcomed in the teens of the 20th century in New York. The Armory show is the one that's always used as the beginning. And then the United States had, during the Second World War, all of those people who had to flee Europe, and you had all the surrealists, you had all of these marvelous figures, needn't name them, there, and they too then mingled with the thought of the United States. Now, not so many went to Canada, but it's very interesting that Canada had Wyndham Lewis up there.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Wow.
Oh, was he terrible. He hated Canada. He wrote a whole novel to tell you how awful Toronto was.
But he hated everything.
Yeah, well, then you say, this is what do you mean? That was the host country, you were the guest, you were somehow protected and so on, and then you look and he's just as hard on his own country. So I think he would have been as hard on anybody. With that modernist mind again. And he's, after all, part of the big push. It is not true, though, that modernism is strongly American. In fact, the anti-art stuff that don't be pretentious, I am tiring of, including certain aspects of performance art. This is an inheritance from a marvelous, exciting thing going on in Europe first, and I think of Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire in 1912, which is doing so many wonderful... This is not to say I don't like a lot of what's going on, but we're getting a little tired of the software that's supposed to be, pushing art out of its privileged place so that it can speak from the condition of each and every one of us, or whatever its effort is.
The high modernists we think of, though, Ezra Pound, and particularly as a kind of internationalist too.
And T.S. Eliot.
And T.S. Eliot, right.
And as one of you said to me the other night, well, we was from Britain, but among you here, among your faculty, and he said, well, we still claim Eliot. Well, of course, the Americans also claim Eliot, always mentioning that he comes from Missouri, and we all know what that means. Yeah. Even when we wind up a high Anglican, we know what it means to come from Missouri. And an interesting place, Missouri. And Ezra Pound, with the relationship, he went to England in order to meet, to understand, to become a secretary for the poet he thought is the greatest living poet, William Butler Yeats. So in some part, England can claim Pound, too. Perhaps they would not wish to.
Or disclaim, as we seem to be doing.
Yes, and giving back to America. Yeah. As America gave him back to Italy in order to release him from St. Elizabeth's. Yeah. Curious, that problem within modernism, that you can have great poetry with appalling politics.
The political agenda is really quite nasty, yes. And
you're being polite, nasty.
Yeah, and it runs through the high modernist, doesn't it? Eliot, Wyndham Lewis, Pound.
Includes D.H. Lawrence,
yeah,
I mean, if you start looking very carefully.
A kind of, in the 20s, maybe genteel anti-Semitism was fashionable, but...
Well, it quickly becomes ungenteel.
Yeah.
For example, in one period of Pound's work, he did, of course, apologize later, that it was a mistake. I mean, I don't think we have time to go into that, but the kind of mistake it was, it's truly meant. But after what happened, an apology seems hardly adequate. What you want to know is what is the political operation of things that allows such horrors to burst out of the Western tradition as it turns democratic.
Yeah.